I'm Dan Pablocki. You are listening to Our First Fears, a podcast about gateway horror, past and present, with artists working in the genre today. Today's episode is an interesting one for a few reasons. First, I got to speak with my hilarious friend, author extraordinaire Elizabeth Eulberg, whose new book series for middle grade readers is called Scared Silly. The first book is called Curses Are the Worst, and it is a grody good time. Second, this is actually the first conversation that I recorded for this podcast, well over a month and a half ago at this point. Having listened to it again as I edited and then mixed the tracks, I can definitely hear a difference in sound quality from later recordings, which was due entirely to my own inexperience using my, at the time, new software. I held off on releasing Elizabeth's chat until now because the second book in the Scared Silly series comes out in just a couple weeks. That volume is called Zombie Wedding Crashers, and I can't wait to pick it up, as it's sure to buzz the funny and creepy bones that come with the cooling of the season, at least up here in New York State where I currently reside. Elizabeth's other middle grade books include the great Shelby Holmes series, which is a youthful riff on Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock mysteries, as well as a great number of YA novels, including The Lonely Hearts Club, Prom and Prejudice, and Past Perfect Life. The fear that Elizabeth brought to the table for our talk is the most acutely felt of any of my guests so far. As you'll soon hear, Elizabeth's full-blown snake phobia caused her to walk out of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom when she was just a kid in her friend's basement. We'll be talking about that film, along with another of Spielberg's snake-filled classics, Raiders of the Lost Ark. We get into how early Spielberg films were able to balance true, bloody horror tropes with his more kid-friendly plotlines, as well as the question of whether or not we, as writers, can manifest our fears into reality simply by putting ideas and words down on paper. Strangely, what we don't get into is a true introduction to the plots of the Indiana Jones films, which is something I only discovered I needed to do while recording future interviews. To make up for that, I suppose I'll give the briefest description of the films right now, just in case there's anyone listening who has no idea who Indiana Jones is. The first film came out in 1981, written by Lawrence Kasdan, with story credit by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman, and directed, of course, by Steven Spielberg. It stars Harrison Ford as globe-trotting archaeologist Indiana Jones, a college professor who moonlights as a crypt-looting, Nazi-fighting enthusiast of esoteric relics. In the first film, he and his old friend Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen, race to find the biblical Lost Ark of the Covenant in the 1930s, before Hitler's Nazis can acquire its mysterious power. In Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the aforementioned prequel from 1984, Indiana is tasked with rescuing some sacred stones from a village in India, as well as the village's children who've been kidnapped by an evil cult in a supposedly abandoned palace in the jungle. This time around, Indiana is joined by lounge singer Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw, and a kid sidekick called Short Round, played by recent Oscar winner Ke Huy Quan. Elizabeth and I don't really go deep into the many cultural insensitivities that make Temple of Doom a problematic piece of nostalgia, mostly because we get so caught up in talk of all the snakes and other horrors that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were throwing at us back then. For further context, I'd encourage you to check out the many opinion pieces about Temple of Doom that are available to read online. All that being said, Elizabeth and I do end up going into the gory, dark places that Spielberg and Lucas tried to illuminate, and despite both films being rated PG, I'd use discretion if listening to this episode with very young folks. Now, turn down the lights, turn up the volume, and get ready to explore our first fears. Hi, Elizabeth. How's it going?
Hi, Dan. Good to see you.
This is Elizabeth Eulberg, and she is a prolific writer of novels and series for young adults and kids. Elizabeth, do you want to tell us a little bit about your writing career and what you're working on now and all that good stuff?
Yeah. I feel like with writers, we're always working on like 84 million things all at the same time. But yeah, right now my new series for middle grade readers is appropriately enough called Scared Silly, which makes me, I think, a great guest for this, even though we're friends. But yeah, it's about a witch's curse that has descended upon a town of Cauldron's Cove. In each book, there's like kind of a monster of the week. So the second book is coming out in September of this year, which is 2023, called Zombie Wedding Crashers. And I'm working on finishing up the third book, which is Vampires Ruin Everything, which comes out the beginning of 2024. So yeah, so it's been fun, and hopefully there's 3. Hopefully there will be more, but I'm also now working on an even scarier adventure, which is writing for adults. So that's a new genre. So yeah.
Oh, but like scary things for adults, or just it's scary because this is new for you?
Yeah, scary because it's new for me. I'm going back to my rom-com roots. That's what I wrote in before I started writing middle grade. I wrote romantic comedies mostly for teenagers. Yeah. So I'm going back to that. So yeah, it's scary in that it's a new genre. It's a new, just, the fear of the unknown, I guess.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit later about how you transitioned from those rom-coms for teens over to the scary, silly stuff that is coming out now. I think first what I want to do is ask you a question that I'm going to try and ask all of the guests on this show, and that is, do you remember the first time you ever felt frightened?
Yes. So one of I don't want to say it's like one of my earliest memories, but a memory that I have so clear in my head was, I think I was like 6 or 7. My best friend Tara and I were at like a campsite, and we went to go to the pool, and we decided to take a shortcut, which was through all of these I can see the field, this like long grass, and we were walking through, and we see and hear something in the grass, and we go over, and it is a very large American boa constrictor. And
what?
Yeah, yes. And
I didn't know that there was such a thing.
Well, so what happened was, we're screaming, we come running down, and her mom sees us running down the hill, screaming. The snake is just following like the footsteps, right? And the funny thing about this story is, up until like 10 years ago, Tara and I disagreed about this part. She was wearing a flip-flop, and her flip-flop came undone, and I went back and grabbed it, and it was near the snake. And for so long, she was like, no, I grabbed it. I was like, Tara, I grabbed it. And like 10 years ago, she's like, no, you totally grabbed it. I'm like, I know I did. Like, what a good friend I am. So we're like screaming.
Wait, so was she like trying to claim the bravery, or
I think so.
And she knew the whole time?
Yeah, I think, how it's like maybe, I mean, we were really young, but like, I just remember it so, and it wasn't like I ran back and it was like on its head, like it slipped and she was like, oh, and I went and but I just remember just going and seeing her mom and screaming and like losing my mind and being so scared, because this was, I mean, a very significant thing. And then happened, fun fact, that snake escaped from a zoo. That's why there was this huge, like gigantic boa constrictor, like in the middle of a field. It had escaped from like the Baraboo Zoo. Now, do you remember, several years ago, there was a cobra that they couldn't find from the Bronx Zoo. Like there was a whole thing, they didn't know where this cobra was. And it was like someone made a Twitter of it. It was like the cobra having adventures in like, New York. I lost my mind. I was so paranoid, and friends were like, Elizabeth, you live like across the river. Like, why do you think this cobra
Snakes can swim, Elizabeth.
I know, can find you. I'm like, because it wouldn't be the first time a snake escaped a zoo and attacked me. And they're like, what? So that like literally insane thing happened to me younger, which caused me to have, and by the way, that is only one of several snake stories I have, because there's something about them. They love me. And that like tipped off my complete fear of snakes, which I feel is rightfully so. Like, I'm like, I have every right to be terrified of snakes.
That sounds like trauma.
Yeah.
which is where so much of these things come from. Can you describe what the snake looked like? Like, how big are we talking?
So, here's the thing. I was young. I don't know. It was very large, but I'm younger. So like, you think, it was like 80 feet as far as I'm concerned. I mean, any snake length is not good. What's interesting was, my most recent snake trauma, happened a few years ago in Costa Rica, and I literally blacked out from it. Like, I remember turning and seeing this huge, like, snake, and I had friends who were there who heard me scream and come running back, and I was just like shaking and just like freaking out. And I'm like, they all ran and saw it, so they were able to like tell me, because I just blacked out. I was like, it's interesting. I think my mind was like, we're shutting this down. You do not need to have this. I saw enough to know what it was, and then got out and screamed bloody murder. But I mean, it was like green, and I think it had a little bit of red in it. Like the big, like, the green, and it wasn't like a full color. It was like, it had a pattern. It was like that, like the big kinds that they have. It was quite big around too. The circumference was quite large, because those are those big, ridiculous ones you see in zoos, like not at a campground. The ones that like sometimes they will cut open and there's like somebody inside, like that kind. Oh God. Yeah. Also, there was like this Washington Post recently, like a few months ago, there was this article about like, the headline was, a woman went into the jungle to do something. She got eaten by a snake. And I'm like, I don't, like, why does anybody need to, I was like, thank God there wasn't a picture. Like, I mean, it was a pretty big, but also I was 6 years old. It could have been like 2 feet for all I know, but in my,
right. Everything's bigger when you're a kid,
Yeah.
I remember the ride on the bus to my elementary school felt like an hour.
Oh yeah.
And with all the stops, maybe it winded around and it took a little bit of time, but like I went back to my hometown, or one of my hometowns, Lincoln, Rhode Island, a couple years ago, and I made the drive from my old house to the school, and it was like 2 minutes. Like, couldn't have been any more than 2 minutes. And like, I was like, wow, it kind of showed me like how different kids perceive the world than adults. And even our memories, like our memories looking back, it's like, no, that never happened, or it didn't look quite like that, or, so I'm kind of fascinated by the things that scare us when we were kids. I don't know if I'm not particularly scared of snakes. I definitely have some strange phobias, like sharks and undersea creatures with large mouths and sharp teeth. But like, I don't know why it never happened for me that like I couldn't watch a snake thing. I think the one thing about snakes for me is that idea of like being eaten, like that. Yeah, I know that whole like python thing being stuck in the stomach, like, and I think maybe, do you remember the Shel Silverstein sort of poem / song, I'm being eaten by a boa constrictor?
No, but I'm glad I don't. And also this is, a podcast, but the listeners should know that anytime, like I literally shivered, like when Dan has mentioned
just now.
Like, I'm just like, like I was like, I'm having, physical reaction to the thought of it. That was a Shel Silverstein poem?
Yeah, it was from one of his books, Where the Sidewalk Ends, or, A Light in the Attic, or something. And I don't know if I have the rights to be able to like say it, but it was like, I'm being eaten by a boa constrictor, a boa constrictor, a boa constrictor. And it went on like 1, 2, he's up to my shoe, 3, 4, he's like, and then slowly, like, the narrator is like, doesn't even get to finish because like, gulp.
You know what? Now I think I maybe do. I mean, I loved Shel Silverstein as a kid. I also loved it because it was kind of messed up, like the humor and I've always been, I love that kind of like weird humor and darkness kind of thing.
I loved those books. I loved his poems. Like I loved anything that was like easily digestible, like that I could read in a moment. I think for me, like maybe it was that poem or that song that sort of just made being eaten by a boa constrictor seem very silly. And I was like, I'm not scared of snakes. There's a song about it. It's fine.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Not for you.
Yeah, no. I mean, yeah. I actually have gotten a bit better. For instance, there's a bridge near me that every once in a while, the first time it happened, I did freak out a bit. There's a guy who sometimes stands there with a snake and holds it just to get like tourists to take pictures. It's a really touristy area. And it's like a albino snake. It's not super big, maybe a couple feet, and it's not like big, but the first time I saw it, I did flinch and I like walked away. Now, anytime it's warm out and there are a lot of people, I will be looking for him. So then there's not a surprise. And literally I look to see where he is and then make sure I don't look. I keep my eyes forward and make a big U-turn, so I don't go past him. Yeah. I think younger Elizabeth. I mean, there was one time I was in Times Square and I was with a friend, and have you ever seen every once in a while in Times Square, there's people holding like the huge boa constrictors, like the one that I saw, which are like a couple feet around circumference and are probably like 12 feet, hanging on them to get people to take pictures. And one time I saw it, I screamed, I literally pushed children aside so I could run, like in middle of time. Like my friend just was like, what's wrong with Elizabeth? And turns and sees the snake. And she's like, oh yeah, she's like several blocks away now. I just was like, and there were just children thrown on the floor so I could move. So I don't do that anymore. But it is, it's like the anticipation. Like I know that guy sometimes is there. So I think a lot of times with fears, and when we get into talking about the movies that I selected, I think there's a huge thing about anticipation that can make it even scarier. It's like the unknown that you don't know, that's why I think people like scary things. They go into it knowing, and it's like growing up, Tara, my aforementioned best friend, her father owned the movie theater in town. So I got to go see anything, and my parents didn't care what the rating was because they knew, like, if I got scared, it was going to be my fault. Like, it just wasn't a big deal. But when we would watch scary movies, like, it's quiet and dark and something's going to come out. And it's not so much the vision, it's the sound. It's always like the bang or the orchestra that makes you jump. So Tara and I would always just and I still do it now, like I cover my ears because then it's not as scary because it's like, but it's the anticipation, something's coming, and that's what gets you like riled up. And so I think it's like the anticipation. So it's for me, if someone's like, they're just FYI, you're going to walk into this next room, there's going to be a snake. I'll prepare myself.
Yeah, of course. Somebody tells you there's going to be a snake, all of a sudden you're going to be looking around for it everywhere.
Yeah.
No, I want to ask you, because I know, like, in conversations we've had in the past, you are famously unperturbed by horror movies.
Oh, yeah.
And so despite all of this stuff that you've been talking about, like the anticipation and snakes in particular, but why do you feel like horror doesn't affect you in the way it affects so many other people?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because I grew up watching, like, I just don't get, I think there's a practical side to me. And I think the practical side is like, I have had experiences with snakes almost killing me. So like, there's like that rationality, like, right. Yeah. There's like that. I've almost died. Yeah. So with scary movies, I just don't like, it's funny, everybody talks about like Hereditary being so scary. And I was like, was it? I mean, I remember being like, ooh, that's creepy and I like it, but I don't get, the only time I'll get jumpy at a movie is just, again, it's like the jump scare that they purposely do. But like, I went to go see, remember the first Paranormal Activity? I saw it with a couple friends in a packed New York City theater. It was funny. My friends next to me were like holding on to each other and they were freaking out. And I was like, well, she's just sleeping. You know, I was like, why are you like, but they were like wanting to get freaked out. And I think like I go in very much like, I'm going to be cool. And every once in a while, like I'll get a jump scare, but I don't give anything that gives me like nightmares really. I'll get grossed out by like teeth stuff. Like if someone's getting their like teeth, pulling out teeth, like I don't like to, like I'll maybe cover my eyes for that, but I don't normally, it's funny. Like I'll just be like, I like horror movies. I don't know.
Yeah, it is funny. And I mean, speaking of horror movies, the two that you brought up to discuss, the first two Indiana Jones movies, and ultimately like Indiana's fear of snakes, right? And you relating to that. I can't remember in the other movies if snakes play a role. I feel like they always make a nod or a wink to it. Like even in the newest movie, there was like a very, actually for me, terrifying snake quote unquote moment.
Yeah.
When they go on that dive. One of my fears is like deep water and the ocean. And so like I watched that whole scene. Spoiler alert for anybody who has yet to see the new Indiana Jones movie, which I really loved. But they go on an expedition down to a wreck, and it's not snakes, but it's eels. And like they absolutely torture Indiana Jones with eels in this movie. And it was kind of great.
Well, and they do say, with the eels, they do say like, what is that? He's like eels. He's like eels. They're like, yeah, they kind of look like snakes. And I was like, here we go. Cause every single Indiana Jones movie has snakes in them. And
all of them do.
Every one of them does. So in the third movie, so again, my best friend growing up, she would sometimes watch movies beforehand if there was going to be a snake. So then she knew when there was going to be a snake. So I knew when to cover my eyes or tell me what was going to happen. So
that's
like,
a good friend.
Yeah. So the third Indiana Jones movie, it starts off with like young River Phoenix as Indiana Jones. And I haven't seen it in a while. But he's on top of a train or something that's like a circus thing. And what happens is he falls into one where there's a huge snake, which is what gives him his fear of snakes. So, and then the fourth one, it's just this, like, Indiana's like sinking, and he's like, get something to, like, he's sinking in like quicksand. And he says, like, get something like a rope or something to pull me out. And they could only find like a giant snake to throw at him. And I did jump in the theater for that. Cause I was like, good, you know, cause they always have to do something. I was like, why? And so I was going into the new Indiana Jones movie. I was a little like, all right, get ready for the snakes. So I do appreciate that A, it wasn't snakes, and B, it was, it was like eels. So I was fine. But the funny thing with Indiana Jones, so I, again, say I don't get scared of movies. However, one movie I actually remember sitting in our basement, we were watching it, and I was like, I'm out, was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Solely because there's a scene, and I think it's because I've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I love that movie. But there is, you know, there's a room full
massive
of
snake scene.
snakes, like many snakes. And the funny thing is, in order to be like what we were talking before about your ride to school that you thought was an hour, I honestly, if you would have asked me when I was younger, and if you would have asked me like 3 weeks ago, how much of that movie took place in that room with snakes, I would have said like 95% of the movie takes place. I went back and watched the movie. Actually, I went back and watched it, and I timed it. It is only in total 6 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. Of them with them being surrounded by all those snakes. Then at one point they get through and other things happen. But because Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark had so many snakes. And again, I love that movie. And I saw it a few times, and I would just like cover my eyes. I didn't cover my eyes this time because I knew, I'm better at it, and I know. At the very beginning of the movie, when he is escaping and he jumps into the plane, there's a huge snake in in the bucket.
Yes.
And I forgot about that. I actually did jump. I was like, oh God, but again, Hereditary, boring. So what happened was I'm little. I know I loved the movie, but I'm little, and I remember watching Temple of Doom and just being like anticipating and being worried about like how many snakes there were going to be. And I remember hearing at the time everybody saying it was really scary. And I think it's the reason why there's a PG-13 rating now, I believe.
Yes. I actually went back and did some research because in my memory, like, talk about unreliable memory as a kid. I remember hearing that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which was notorious in my, I guess, second grade classroom, because people were like, oh my gosh, there's eyeball soup. Oh my gosh, there's, this and that, people's hearts getting ripped out and while they're still alive. I remember I had heard that in my memory, was sure that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was the first PG-13 movie because of all these crazy things. And I was so sure of this. I would have bet large amounts of money on this. But then I went back for some reason a couple months ago and I was like, oh yeah, I want to just confirm Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was the first PG-13 movie. And I looked it up and it's not. Do you know what it is?
Was it Octopussy?
No, it was Red Dawn.
Oh, okay.
The one with,
was it, is Patrick Swayze in that one?
Patrick Swayze, and I think Jennifer Grey was in it too.
Oh yeah. No, because I remember, but it's because of Indiana Jones being scary is why they implemented it, though, right? Yeah, and that's
Spielberg was the one who recommended. It was sort of the two movies that I read sort of sparked the whole PG-13 change was Temple of Doom and Gremlins by Joe Dante.
Yeah, I loved Gremlins. Was Gremlins? I mean, I guess. Again, look at me. I didn't find Gremlins scary at all. If you put like a steak on a plate at a dining table, I'm like, I'm not. Yeah, like I'm not watching this movie. Like that's the thing is everybody kept talking about how scary it was. So I think I was even more freaked out. They're like, oh, it's way more scary than Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I'm like little being like, what is this? And so I was anticipating it, and we were watching it. I remember being in the basement, like being nervous about it. And then there's a scene where they're eating. And that's the thing. I was actually talking to friends yesterday and I was mentioning like Temple of Doom. My friend's like, that movie's so scary because they eat monkey brains. And for me, what caused me to walk out, which I've only ever done twice regarding being scared in a movie that I was like, I can't do this, was when they're at the dinner table and then they put down a platter of a huge like boa constrictor that was very similar to the one that like chased me as a kid down for them to eat. And I literally was like, nope. Like I remember standing up and being like, I can't watch this movie and like walking away and going upstairs. And I do remember the end scene though. So I think maybe at one point I got called back to watch like, short round in the thing. But what's interesting is when, Kiwi Hong, I think is how you say his name, when he won the Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once, which by the way, I saw that movie. I loved it. I had no idea he was the kid from Temple of Doom until he gave his Golden Globe acceptance speech. And I was like, wait, what?
No way.
Yeah. Like he was doing, we said, thanks Steven Spielberg. I don't know why. I think maybe because I didn't really watch, although he was in Goonies. I don't know.
Goonies. Yeah.
Yeah. But didn't make the connection at all.
I recognized him immediately from the trailers just because his voice is so distinctive and he's still kind of, still very similar to his childhood voice. So I was like, that's Short Round. I was like, I gotta go see this movie. And I was super impressed with him.
I don't know why I didn't make the connection, but then I was kind of thinking, all right, I should go back and watch Temple of Doom now because I am a grown adult. Yeah. And so I actually recently was flying on a plane and I watched it. And I did get a little like nervous just with that remembering of being little and being freaked out. But it was totally fine. When they did put the snake down, I was anticipating that. Like I remember that so well. So when that scene came up, I was just like, okay, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, which made me like, but then after that, I was totally fine. So I was just like, oh, okay.
Really? Because I literally I rewatched it last night And I remember loving, I've seen it probably a dozen times. It's one of those films that when it would come on cable television as a kid, or even network television on like a Sunday afternoon, I'd be like, oh, gotta sit down and watch this. This is a good one. I don't know if the versions that I saw were edited for television. So like those were the things that were stuck in my mind versus the one that I watched on Disney Plus streaming last night. That movie goes so hard. It is, and this is another thing I wanted to talk about with regarding horror and horror for kids. I think the movie is made for, all ages, but like kids especially. There's a little kid character. There's the rescue of a village full of children. The reuniting of them with their families at the end is very Spielbergian, sort of like golden glow over everything. But it goes hard. It goes so hard. That scene with the snakes. So for listeners, if you don't know what we're talking about, the Indiana Jones movies, just go watch them. There's a scene. Indiana Jones and his two companions end up at an old palace in India, and there's a young Maharaja who invites them for dinner. It's probably very not probably. It is very culturally insensitive in a lot of ways. Kind of moving on from that aspect of it, like you get the snake plate, which is I think one of the guests at the dinner party calls it snake surprise. And, they cut open the belly of the snake and all of these live baby snakes come squirming out of the belly all over the table. I was like, oh my God, that is so, and like even last night, I was like, that is so intense.
Yeah.
That was the least of the horror in this movie. I was really shocked by a moment when Indy goes off in search of this mystical stone to bring back to this village that he's trying to help. He has a moment where he's collecting the stones and he sees this statue of a snake, and he like kind of looks at it and is like, oh, I got your number. You can't scare me. But over his shoulder in the windows, and I'd never noticed this before, Elizabeth, there are hanging like full skinned human being leathers blowing in the breeze. And I was like, I'd never noticed it before. I don't know if they had cut it out of some of like the television versions of the film that I'd seen, but I was like, this movie is insane. It's crazy. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and sort of bringing it back to like the books that you've been working on. So you have this visceral, gory, scary things happening to these characters. Especially in Temple of Doom. It's also bonkers silly, like so ridiculously silly. Willie, the lounge singer, is just constantly, quipping and screaming and damsel in distressing. And I wish she had a little bit more agency in the film, but she does land a really good punch at the end. Lots of really silly dialogue. It's playing obviously with genre of the 30s, that Pulp Fiction era. And I don't know if the movie would have worked as well as it does if those moments didn't balance out the literal skinned human beings hanging from the walls of the Temple of Doom, or the heart being ripped out of somebody's chest as he's lowered into a pit of fire. Do you think when it comes to scary stuff for kids, like comedy is necessary? Like, do you think, like having written now a series of books that are scary and also very, very funny, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. I think especially for like little kids. And what's interesting is I wouldn't say that. The funny thing is, I was going to say I didn't really think Raiders of the Lost Ark was like a big kids film, but I loved it as a kid. What's interesting with that is, so when I watch movies, I sometimes like to go on IMDb and look at the trivia. And originally, this is just so interesting because I was thinking about how this change was for the best. Also made me like question George Lucas sometimes. But originally, they wanted Indiana Jones to be like James Bond and be like a woman's man. So if you remember at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he's teaching, all the girls are like looking at him, and one person is literally blinking really slowly, and it says like, I love you on her like eyelids. And, and what they said was that they filmed this, and Spielberg and Lucas got into it over it, and Spielberg won out, was when, I forget who comes over to Indy's house. He's wearing like he's wearing a bathrobe, and originally there was supposed to be a young woman in his bedroom. And in the script, it says that Marion is 25, and her relationship with Indy was 10 years prior when she was 15. And there's a line in the movie where she says, I was just a kid.
I was just a kid, yeah.
And so they decided that they didn't want him to be this big player as like James Bond. And so they cut the scene with the woman being in the bedroom when he's there and him having any affairs. And I do feel like, I mean, he obviously, especially in Temple of Doom, he has a little like, he refers to Kate Capshaw all the time as like sweetheart. And I kind of like what we were saying before about her having agency. I was a little bit like, I mean, it was of the time, to have, but Marion was such a strong character for them to then go and have,
awesome.
Yeah, she's the best. And then for them to kind of backtrack on it, I was a little like, disappointed. But I loved that movie as a kid. And I think because people ended up loving Raiders of the Lost Ark, like kids, that they wanted to make Temple of Doom more kid friendly, which is why they had the short round character. But like, you do need to have, I think, humor. And even if you look at like the Scream movies, which like a lot of teens like, there's that like almost like a meme aspect where they're like very self-aware, and there's like jokes about like horror movies from the very first one, and very self-aware, and there's humor in it, and of being aware of like being in a horror movie and the things that are involved in it. And I think there does need to be balance, especially if you want younger audiences, because I know that like as a kid, even though I was terrified of snakes, and again, I thought like the snake pit part was like 85% of the movie. I remember laughing when there's that scene where the sword guy is doing all these like sword things, and like Indiana just like shoots them, like I just remember thinking that was so funny, and like certain things, I like someone gets shot, I think it's funny, but just like the humor of it all, and like Indiana's delivery and his like sly, like little smile. And I think it is. And for like my Scared Silly books, they're more silly than scary. They're just, I always say, like, I think they're 90% scary with, silly with a little bit of scary thrown in. I put the kids in preposterous situations, which one does, like, when you want to do humor, and, but they're very aware of it. And also, I get to kind of play around with the different tropes and zombies and what we all have seen zombie movies, like, vampires, and you would go off
evil
of
scientists.
You go off of what you know from like pop culture, of like dealing with vampires. It's like, okay, this is what I think I know of them. Which was interesting for the third book is I actually Googled like, what happens if you get bitten by a vampire? Like, can you recover from a vampire bite? And there were different answers regarding whether or not someone could. And I was like, God, I don't know what to do. And I was like, you know what, Elizabeth, it's fiction. You can make your own rules. Like, this isn't an actual scientific thing. Like, cause there were some that said, oh, if you're just bitten and they don't take all your blood, it depends on who bites you, or you can recover, or you have there are different lores. And I just remember at one point really stressing over which lore to go with. And I was like, or you can have your own. Vampires aren't real, Elizabeth.
I mean, we've seen how vampire lore has changed over the past, and you especially, having worked on the Twilight series in some way. Who would have ever imagined that vampires would be sparkly? Like, like you can make up whatever the heck you want.
Yeah.
make those rules up.
I was the publicist for the Twilight books, and I remember the author saying like she looked at like vampires from a very scientific standpoint. Like she just was like, I don't understand why they couldn't do X, Y, or Z, like it just like thinking about it very scientifically. And I was like, I mean, or just, you can make up your own stuff because they're not real.
Well, that's fair. I'm glad she did research. So, can you tell me a little bit about where you got the idea for Scared Silly?
Yeah, I actually was watching. So I moved to London and I did do a 2-week quarantine. So I moved in the fall of 2020 when you had to like quarantine from going into another country. And I remember I was on day 12 and I watched, have you seen the Netflix movie Vampires versus the Bronx?
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I was watching that movie and there's that scene where so it's about these kids who live in the Bronx and like, it's very well done because, I mean, it's a great movie, but it kind of has to do with like gentrification of their neighborhood, but it's with vampires instead. And, when these like teens realize they're vampires, they watch the Blade movies, to figure out like how to defeat. Yeah. And that's when I was like, that is so smart. When I was saying before about like, you go off of pop culture, like these kids were like, all right, they're vampires. Well, let's go watch Blade to figure out like how we can kill vampires. And I love that so much. And I was like, you know what? I wonder if I can do a series where like kids have to defeat certain monsters and they go off of like, I'm going to have one kid be like really into like graphic novels and like really into like, like the fantastical, because that would be funny. But I remember, the reason I remember so specifically when this idea happened, because normally, I don't know about you, but like ideas kind of form over time or you think about something. But I actually tweeted that night. Like, I think it was like, on day 12 of quarantine, I think I came up with my, idea of my next series. We'll see how I feel when I can leave, like go outside, because at that point I was just a little going nutty for not actually seeing another human being for almost 2 weeks. Yeah. And I just really liked the idea. And it's funny. What I love about it is part of my research is like watching movies, to get ideas, so like I watch like a bunch of zombie movies and just to see, I don't know, just about like zombies and, vampires. And I prefer the sillier ones, just because they're just more fun to watch. Like, I love Shaun of the Dead. That's a great movie.
Shaun of the Dead is incredible.
Yeah.
Did you watch, have you seen, Return of the Living Dead?
Oh, yeah.
It's from like 1983 or so. It's funny, but it also is like, it does all of the very, very gross things. I mean, I guess Shaun of the Dead does very gross things too, like super gross things. Yeah, that, like, speaking of comedy and horror, those are two really good examples, especially with the zombie genre. Yeah,
it's just like, that's the thing is, I remember I would always ask like on Twitter when it wasn't a garbage fire, like I would ask people like, what's a good like zombie movie or what's your favorite? Because I was just very curious about like what people liked, and I just prefer like funny movies, and I do really like when horror especially combines humor, because I just think like, again, Shaun of the Dead is such a great movie.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's about balance. Like you can go hard. You can do Hereditary. You can do Martyrs. You can do all of these wildly adult-centric stories. And, if you're not trying to get a young audience, that's totally fine. But I think the thing is like balancing that sense of that humor. And it doesn't have to be crazy. Often it can be, and that's really fun too. But like even just having family dynamics, like, and I think Spielberg is always really good with that. Like E.T., was creepy in a lot of ways. I remember I was 5 years old when it came out. My family had to they were like, well, let's go see, like, we'll go see this first and see if you can handle it. Which is weird because I feel like I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark before I saw E.T. And I don't know why they didn't have a problem with Raiders of the Lost Ark with, Alfred Molina getting speared in the head within the first 10 minutes of the film. But like they had to worry about this alien creature for me. But, I was given the okay. But the Spielberg thing of the family dynamics of, found family, especially in the Indiana Jones movies, it works for engaging with younger audiences as well. And I think that's why we remember these movies and, why they've stuck with us. So I guess one more question before we end. Will snakes be making an appearance in any of the Scared Silly books?
Okay.
Coming up?
So, no. I mean, no, I don't think so. But the crazy thing is, I was on a writing retreat in Costa Rica, and I was writing this book that I don't think will ever see the light of day. But at the time I was working on this book where, it was like set in fantastical land, and like the villain was a snake, and there were a lot of different creatures, and I was Googling fun facts about the animals, but I had to have a friend Google the snake ones because I didn't want to like see pictures. Like I knew if I Google, I just didn't want to. But so what was crazy is, so I was like writing these scenes, and I was fine with it. Now I talked about it earlier, but that night we were having dinner. And this place that was rented for the writing retreat, it was all outdoors except for the bedrooms. So it's all open spaces. And at night, there would sometimes be like raccoons that would come into the kitchen if we didn't have the food like tucked away. And there was a walk-in freezer. There was a walk-in, what's the word? Pantry. There's a walk-in pantry with a big freezer that every night I would fill a bottle of water and I'd chuck it in that freezer. So we were having dinner. I go to refill my thing. I turn to go to the freezer, and there was a plastic bag on the ground. And I love this plastic bag because this plastic bag, I'm not kidding, I think saved my life. I know I think I'm being overly dramatic, because what happened was, I was walking fast to go throw my thing, and I see the plastic bag, so I slowed down because I was like, oh, is there like a raccoon? And I turn the corner, and that's when I see like this giant snake on like in the pantry, and that's when I scream. I let out a blood-curdling scream, and I come running back, and I'm shaking, and my friends are like, "Oh, did you see a raccoon?" And again, they have to tell me this because I blacked out, and I go, "Snake!" And a bunch of them go running over and start screaming and take pictures of the snake. I am not okay. I'm shaking. And my friend Kelly, who's also a writer, comes over and she's like, use what you're feeling in your work. Use this emotion that you're feeling. But I don't want to. Like, I was like, I'm not okay. So I was not okay because literally I almost ran into a snake. Now, so someone took a picture of it. And a couple of friends came in my room and watched TV in my bed because I was not okay. I was really freaked out.
Elizabeth, was the snake in the bag?
No, the bag is what caused me to not walk as fast. So, and then I turned the corner. That's the thing is I was just like going, but when I saw the bag on the floor, I just was like, oh, I wonder if like a raccoon. Like, I don't know why the bag was on the floor. I know nothing about it. Raccoon. Well, like, it was something, it denoted that that there was some kind of, something happened, that something got moved. And so I just was like, oh, maybe there's a raccoon or something. I don't know. I'm just grateful for the bag. Because honestly, had I not seen the bag and I was walking as fast as I would have run into the snake. I most likely would have, like, stepped on it or run into it. No, so the thing is, I know, it gets worse. So that night, I'm still like not okay. And I was just doom scrolling on Twitter. And one of my author friends, Sarah Reese Brennan, actually took a picture of the snake and she posted, oh, we saw a snake something. And then our friend Kelly replied, because on Twitter, if you follow the people, you can see their thread. And she replied, I actually looked it up and it's a nocturnal something rattlesnake, one of the most poisonous in Costa Rica. Yes, that's why I say I could have died. If it bit me, I would be dead. And so, I know, Dan, I'm not like, they love me. They need to leave me alone. So yeah. And then Sarah replied, will nobody tell Elizabeth? And I replied, Elizabeth's seeing this. And Sarah was in the room next to me. And I just hear Sarah go, oh no. And there's only 2 days left of this retreat. I was not okay. I made people walk with me. I was not going into the pantry. And then that next morning, there were like there was like staff there cleaning and they only speak Spanish and I speak Spanish. And in Spanish, I said, last night there was a giant snake right there. And they were like, no. I was like, see, es verdad. I was like, yes, it's true. And then the woman who like oversees the property came and we were telling her about this. And she's like, no. That snake is only supposed to be in the jungle. This is like, we were on the beach. She's like, those kind of snakes normally aren't there. And I was like, well, it's there because I'm here because like, yeah, I mean, this was January 2019. Yeah.
It had followed you from the Bronx Zoo.
Yeah.
All that way.
So then people were like, I know. So then people were like, well, you wrote it and it came to life, like you wrote this scene involving a snake and then that night you saw a snake. And I was like, I've written several books with cute, nice boyfriends. Like they've never magically appeared. Like I can summon something with my writing and it's a snake. Yeah. Go me. So after that, I'm like, I don't think I'm ever going to write a snake in a book again.
Okay. Fair enough. That's fair. So we will not be getting snake from Elizabeth anytime soon. Well, if you don't want to summon it, I get it. But I think, knowing now how scared you are of this creature, this probably, innocent and, loving creature, I don't anticipate having getting any snake books from Elizabeth Eulberg.
I know.
Soon.
Well, I also think, and it was weird when I was like writing that and thinking about it. I was like, oh, Elizabeth, there's a chance that this book ends up getting made. There's going to be a snake on the cover. But it's weird. I'm fine with like painting, like, as long as I, know it's coming and like the not that I like to talk about her books anymore, but the Chamber of Secrets cover has a snake on the cover of it. And I remember reading that book, knowing it was going to be a turn into a movie, being like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to handle this. But what's funny? I'm fine with fake snakes, like really big fake, like it was very clear that that's fake. So like I wasn't that bothered with it. But I think my thing with like the Indiana Jones is that like they were using those are real snakes.
Yeah. One last thing, but I heard how they filmed it, like when both in the Well of Sorrows.
Yeah, it was like
I think it's called the Well of Souls. When they're in the Well of Souls, and both Indy and Marion separately end up face to face with the Cobra. I learned that they shot that through plexiglass. So I was like, oh, okay. Yeah.
And
but they were right
right
across the glass there. Like that's some bravery.
And they did.
Never mind jumping out of airplanes and all the rest of it. Like face to face through plexiglass with a Cobra. I don't know about that.
there is a part where, and I was trying to find it, rewatching it, that you could see the reflection off the glass as a kid. Because I remember it was very clear, and someone showing it to me to be like, see it, so it's not real. And again, when I was reading the trivia about the movie, they talked about how Harrison Ford's actually not scared of snakes, but the stunt double for Marion was like, she refused to step around them. So they gave the snake handler, they're like, if you're willing to shave your legs, will you do, because you only see it from the waist down. So it's like it was a man who, the scenes where she's like walking around in her dress and you only see her from the waist down, that's actually a guy.
I love these kinds of stories. Like I could probably go on deep dives of all of my favorite scary kid movies. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me about snakes in Indiana Jones. I love those movies. I really loved revisiting Temple of Doom because it reminded me how absolutely bonkers, crazy, scary that movie is. And this was fun.
Yeah. And I'm glad it got me to finally sit down and watch it, and I did when the snake got cut open, I was like, yeah, no, I understand why young me was like, I'm out.
It was understandable.
Yeah. I was like, no, I understand. But then I got through it and I'm glad I did. And I do, again, Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my favorite movies of all time. So I will say, though, Dan, if I have nightmares tonight with snakes, because that happens every once in a while when I talk about them a lot, I will be sending you a message. But I won't be waking you up since I'm different.
Yeah, just reach out. I'm here for you.
Thank you.
Anyway, thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Elizabeth Eulberg for putting herself through the difficult task of revisiting an apparently still very vibrant snake phobia. I never did get that message from her after our chat, so I'm assuming she had no nightmares about pythons or rattlesnakes in the month and a half since we spoke. Once again, her new book in the Scared Silly series comes out in the US on September 19th, 2023, and is called Zombie Wedding Crashers. I hope you get a chance to read it with some young people in your life. Elizabeth always spins a very funny yarn, and these books are no exception. Please subscribe to Our First Fears wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like, you can follow our social media at Our First Fears, one word, on the site formerly known as Twitter, as well as on Instagram. You can also reach out at ourfirstfears@gmail.com. If you do want to get in touch, let me know. Are you being eaten by a boa constrictor? Thanks again for your precious time. I'm Dan Poblocki, wishing you sweet dreams and pleasant nightmares.